Good evening and welcome to the Midnight Inquiry, your guide to cozy dreams and just maybe a bit of learning along the way. Tonight, we'll be talking about the Maya, one of the most sophisticated and enduring civilizations in human history, whose sudden decline remains one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. Before we get settled, please take a moment to like and subscribe so I can reach other sleepless souls like you. And if you could, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Now, let's begin our journey. Imagine the warm, humid air of a rainforest that stretches uninterrupted for hundreds of miles in every direction. It's 2000 BC in what we now call southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and western Honduras. There are no cities yet. No pyramids pierce the canopy. No stone-carved calendars mark the heavens. But the seeds, both literal and cultural, have already taken root. In small scattered settlements beside rivers and wetlands, early agriculturalists are planting maize and watching it rise from the soil. These early Mesoamerican people are cultivating not just food but knowledge, experimenting with squash, chili peppers, and beans, creating the agricultural triad that will sustain one of the most extraordinary civilizations the world has ever seen. Their villages are modest, thatched homes clustered around open communal spaces, grinding stones worn smooth by generations of hands, fields that ebb and flow with the rains. Their tools are stone and wood, their gods still emerging from the mists of oral tradition. But already, something different is happening here. Something slow, patient, deliberate. These early societies begin to engage in long-distance trade, sharing obsidian, jade, and marine shells with neighbours they may never meet. They create pottery adorned with complex patterns, suggestive of identity, ritual, and shared stories. By 1000 BC, these communities are building platforms of earth and stone, lifting certain spaces, temples, altars, ceremonial centres, above the rest, both literally and symbolically. This elevation of the sacred is no accident. It's the first architectural articulation of a worldview that will one day span hundreds of city-states. One of the earliest known major sites is Nac Bay in northern Guatemala. Here, enormous platforms rise out of the jungle, connected by causeways and surrounded by plazas. It is not an isolated anomaly. Sites like San Bartolo, El Mirador, and Civil suggest a growing network of interlinked ceremonial centres, some separated by days of walking through thick forest. But these people are undeterred. They carve and pile and shape their world around a cosmology that places them at the centre of a three-tiered universe. The sky above filled with gods and stars, the earth in the middle where humans, animals and kings dwell, and below it all, the watery underworld, a place of trials and rebirth. This was no static belief system. It evolved alongside their architecture. By 800 BC, the recently uncovered site of Aguada Phoenix in Tabasco reveals a massive artificial plateau measuring more than 1,400 meters in length, built not of cut stone but compacted clay and earth, lacking royal inscriptions but clearly constructed through collective effort. This structure predates the pyramids of El Mirador by centuries and suggests that the impulse to reshape the land to reflect sacred order was embedded early in Maya thought. They were not just building homes, they were building cosmology into the landscape. By the late pre-classic period, 400 BC to 250 AD, the Maya are no longer a loose network of villages. They are a civilization. At sites like Kaminal-Juyu, trade routes converge, markets hum with exchange, ball courts are carved into the earth, where ritual games reenact the cosmic struggle between light and darkness. Writing begins to appear, glyphs incised into stone or painted on pottery, marking the beginnings of what will become one of the most sophisticated writing systems in the pre-Columbian world. These glyphs don't just count or name, they remember. They preserve the names of kings, the dates of battles, the sacred intervals between celestial events. They record births, accessions, and cosmic anniversaries millions of days before and after the present moment, as though time itself were a scroll being unrolled in both directions. The Maya calendar, which will one day cause 21st century panic and fascination alike, begins to take shape, not as a single calendar, but as a layered system. The 260-day ritual calendar, Tzolk'in, the 365-day solar calendar, Hab, and the long count, a rolling tally of days since creation. These were not abstract constructs, they were lived rhythms. Crops were planted, kings were crowned, wars were waged, all in harmony with the celestial drumbeat the Maya had learned to hear. By the time we reach 250 AD, the classic period begins, and the foundation laid over 2,000 years begins to bloom into something dazzling. Cities rise across the Maya lowlands, each one a sovereign kingdom, Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, Palenque, Yaxchilan, connected by trade, diplomacy and war, but each with its own dynasties, its own patron gods, its own calendars and courtly styles. These cities are not random. They are meticulously designed. Temples and observatories are aligned to solstices and equinoxes. Pyramids cast shadows like serpents on ceremonial days. The city itself is a map of the cosmos, and ruling over it is not a mere bureaucrat but an Ajor, a holy lord descended from gods, expected to bleed, to offer his own pain in exchange for cosmic balance. Kings draw obsidian across their tongues and genitals in blood rituals so sacred they are depicted in bas-relief on temple walls. These acts are not cruelty or superstition, they are maintenance. The very order of the universe depends on them. As this civilization flowers, it also learns to endure. Droughts come, wars rage, but the Maya adapt. They terrace hillsides, engineer reservoirs, build causeways to cross swamps. They invent new glyphs to record each shift in power. They do not merely survive, they thrive, and yet already cracks are forming. But those belong to a later chapter. For now, we must remember this. The Maya civilization did not spring from nowhere. It was the product of thousands of years of innovation, experimentation, and reverence. It was built by farmers, priests, artisans, and kings, whose names echo across stone stelae still standing in the jungle. It was never a monolith. It was a constellation of human brilliance flickering through time. And at this moment, at the dawn of its golden age, the light is only just beginning to shine. Imagine now that the year is somewhere around 400 BC, and the rainforest canopy stretches wide and uninterrupted over what will one day be called the Maya lowlands. Beneath the shade of ceiba trees and the laced fronds of palms, civilization is stirring, no longer in its infancy, but not yet at its height. The Maya are emerging not just as scattered agriculturalists, but as urban planners, astronomers, artists, and priests. Cities begin to rise, no longer as isolated ceremonial centres, but as living, breathing organisms. Vast complexes of temples, platforms, plazas, ball courts, and causeways nestled into the topography of jungle and hill. At El Mirador, deep in the Petén Basin of northern Guatemala, stone temples rise like mountains from the canopy. This is no small outpost. At its height, El Mirador covers more than 10 square miles and is home to tens of thousands. The core of the city is dominated by structures such as the massive Danta and Tigre complexes, with pyramids over 70 meters high, rivaling any in the ancient world. But what makes El Mirador so astonishing is not just its size, it's its ambition. The city is laid out according to cosmic principles, its architecture aligned with celestial events, its central plazas designed to stage rituals that span both earth and sky. Causeways, raised limestone roads called Sac-Biob, connect temples and neighbourhoods, threading through the forest like arteries of power and pilgrimage. Some of these causeways stretch miles into the jungle, linking El Mirador with other emerging centres in a growing constellation of ceremonial hubs. And as you walk these paths in your imagination, dust rising beneath your sandals, you realise this is not a frontier. This is a civilization already in full bloom, and it is only the late pre-classic. Alongside El Mirador, Caminaljuyu grows powerful in the Guatemalan highlands. Unlike the lowland cities nestled in rainforest isolation, Caminaljuyu commands trade routes through volcanic valleys, and its influence stretches far and wide. Here too we see monumental platforms, early ball courts, elite tombs filled with jade, obsidian and exotic shells. The people of Caminaljuyu are masters of hydraulic engineering, digging canals and reservoirs to tame the seasonal flow of water. Their control over obsidian from nearby El Chayal gives them both economic and political clout. And in their carved monuments, we see the first whispers of courtly intrigue, dynastic succession, and state-sponsored ritual. These early cities are not carbon copies of each other. Each one has its own flavour, its own ecology, its own patron gods. Yet together, they form a network of cultural innovation that will define the classic Maya world. Writing evolves from mere symbols to full-fledged syllabic script, able to capture not just transactions and dates, but poetry, history and cosmology. The Maya do not simply count time, they describe it, shape it, live within it. Their calendars are not just tools for marking seasons, but mirrors of the divine order. The Tzolk'in calendar of 260 days, with its cyclical permutations of day names and numbers, aligns with the human gestation period, sacred rituals, and the timing of festivals. The 365-day Harb solar calendar tracks agricultural cycles and solstices, and together they form the calendar round, a repeating cycle that every Maya person would have known, like a second skin of time. But for monumental history, for tracing the births of kings, the dedications of temples and the great cataclysms of myth, the Maya invent the long count. It begins on a date equivalent to August 11th, 3114 BC, a day they identify as the birth of the current world age. Every major event is measured from this 0 point, giving even the most mundane inscription a mythic frame. And inscribed in this frame, we begin to see the emergence of named kings and queens. At sites like San Bartolo, murals bloom across plaster walls, scenes of creation, gods vomiting forth corn, humans emerging from the mouths of serpents. At Civil and Holmul, stelae rise to honour rulers and gods alike, their glyphs marching in orderly columns, their iconography alive with jaguars, serpents and skeletal deities. The ball game becomes not just sport but cosmological drama, a reenactment of the hero twins defeating the lords of Xibalba in the Popol Vuh. Cities build formal courts with sloping sides, designed to funnel balls of solid rubber through vertical stone hoops, played to the rhythm of ritual and sacrifice. The players are not merely athletes, they are avatars of divine forces, and in some cases they pay with their lives. As these early centres grow, they begin to interact in new ways, sometimes through trade, sometimes through conquest. El Mirador begins to fade around 150 AD, perhaps due to environmental overreach or shifting political tides, but its architectural legacy echoes through the centuries. New centres rise in its wake. Tikal, Calakmul, and others begin to stir from the pre-classic shadows into the classic light. But we're not there yet. In this late pre-classic moment, the Maya world is vast and varied, not yet bound by the great conflicts of the classic era. It is a world of experimentation, of sprawling ambition and divine intimacy, where cities grow like living texts, and every stone laid is a line in a cosmic poem. Here, in the dense breath of the jungle, a people is sculpting time into architecture, myth into monument. They do not yet know collapse, they know only ascent. It is now around 250 AD, and the rainforest has grown wise to the patterns of stone and sky. This is the dawn of the classic period, the golden age of Maya civilization, when the forest yields cities like pearls strung across the canopy, each gleaming with its own brilliance, ambition and voice. The names now read like chapters in a lost epic: Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, Palenque, Yaxchilan, Quirigua, Caracol, city-states with their own kings and queens, their own gods and calendars, their own rivalries and legends carved into limestone stelae that still rise from the earth like the spines of sleeping giants. Each city is a theatre of power, a machine for ritual, a cosmos folded into stone and plaza. Tikal, nestled in the heart of the Petén, grows to dominate the central lowlands, its pyramids piercing the forest sky, its dynasties spanning centuries. Its Temple 4 rises over 70 metres, built not just as architecture but as an axis mundi, the symbolic centre of the world, crowned by a royal tomb and oriented to sacred celestial events. Its allies and enemies alike orbit it like planets. Teotihuacan from far to the west in central Mexico sends emissaries and soldiers, reshaping Tikal's dynastic trajectory with the mysterious arrival of spear-thrower Owl and his son Yaxnun Ayinatel in the early 4th century AD. This foreign influence, part political, part militaristic, part religious, injects new energy into Tikal, marking the beginning of a dynastic legacy that will last for centuries. Across the forest, Calakmul rises to challenge Tikal's dominance. Known by the emblem glyph Khan, or snake, Calakmul becomes a formidable superpower, forming an anti-Tikal alliance with other cities like Caracol and Dos Pilas. For over a century, the two great powers wage a cold war of shifting alliances and proxy battles, drawing smaller city-states into their orbits, toppling rivals, enthroning client kings. War for the Maya is not just territorial, it is cosmological. Defeating an enemy is not merely a political act, but a reenactment of divine conquest. Prisoners are captured in ritual battles, paraded through the city, and sacrificed on temple steps, their blood an offering to appease the gods and ensure cosmic renewal. Ball courts become arenas not just of sport, but of symbolic resolution, sometimes literal battlefields of elite captives reenacting divine struggles in a sacred loop. And amidst all this, conflict, diplomacy, spectacle, life goes on. Farmers cultivate milpas beyond the city walls, rotating maize and squash in ingeniously managed fields. Artisans craft polychrome ceramics so intricate that the scenes still astonish modern eyes. Scribes ink codices with the movements of Venus and the cycles of eclipses. Priests climb temple stairs with blood-stained robes, timing their rituals to the shadows of equinoxes and the rising of constellations. At Copan in modern Honduras, kings like Kinich Yaxcucmo established dynasties of divine legitimacy, their temples rising in elegant acropolis complexes, their sculptures a symphony of iconography, jaguar paws, death gods, maize blossoms, serpentine spirits. Palenque, in the lush foothills of Chiapas, reaches aesthetic heights in architecture and narrative. Under the reign of Pakal the Great, Palenque's buildings are not just structures, they are repositories of myth and memory. The Temple of the Inscriptions holds not just Pakal's tomb, but an elaborate cosmological tale carved in glyphs, a descent into the underworld rendered in limestone. The cities are linked by more than war. They share artistic styles, calendar notations, religious motifs. They host diplomats and merchants, nobles and scribes. Jade, obsidian, cacao, salt, textiles, and prestige goods flow through these networks. Maya scribes developed distinctive courtly styles of writing and painting, each city cultivating its own flair, a signature of royal identity and cosmic legitimacy. Power is performative. Kings are divine intermediaries, but they must constantly demonstrate their favour with the gods. This is a world of pageantry and prophecy, where the blood of kings renews the sun, where the alignment of stars signals the time to build, to marry, to go to war. Even natural disasters, eclipses, droughts, earthquakes, are folded into the sacred script of history, understood as divine commentary on human behaviour. The classic period is not a monolith, it is a crescendo, a swelling tide of human genius rising towards something unthinkably vast. Each generation builds on the last, not just in architecture and mathematics, but in cosmological comprehension. Temples are not only built, they are rebuilt, layered with new meaning, expanded in size and symbolism. Inscriptions mark not only contemporary events but draw lines back into mythic time, aligning the deeds of living kings with the acts of gods. And yet, even in this era of glory, the seeds of collapse are already present. Environmental strain, overpopulation, internecine warfare, dynastic succession crises. But these are for later. For now, this is the age of wonder, an era when a child born in Copan might walk a sacbe to Tikal, watch a sacred bull game in Palenque, and offer prayers at the foot of Calakmul's pyramids, all beneath a sky charted by their ancestors, a sky they believed they could read like scripture. This is the height of the classic Maya world. Luminous, violent, transcendent, doomed. While dynasties rose and fell in the echoing courts of Tikal and Calakmul, while kings slit their tongues and conjured gods from the smoke of burning copal atop towering pyramids, life for most Maya was a quieter, more cyclical affair. A ritual of dawns and dusks, harvests and hearths, folded into the breathing rhythm of jungle and cosmos. Beneath the ceremonial grandeur, in the sprawling residential zones that webbed out from the ceremonial cores, lay the lifeblood of Maya civilization, its common people, whose hands built the temples, farmed the fields, carried the obsidian, and wove the cloth of culture itself. Picture a modest household on the outskirts of a great city, say Tikal, during the 7th century AD. A cluster of thatched roof homes built from timber and wattle and daub, forms a small compound around a shared courtyard. A woman grinds maize on a metate, her movements slow and rhythmic, the stone already worn concave from years of use. The smell of wood smoke and boiling tamales mingles with the sharp tang of fermenting cacao and the soft sweetness of tropical fruit. Nearby, children play with clay figurines or roll balls fashioned from tree sap, while older siblings help with fetching water or minding the younger ones. The day starts early, before the jungle heat thickens. Men head to milpas, cleared plots of land where they practice swidden agriculture, slash and burn, clearing forest to plant maize, beans and squash in rotating cycles. The soil must rest, the forest must breathe, so fields are carefully managed, often left to regenerate between plantings. Agriculture is a communal and spiritual affair. The planting of maize is timed to the Solkin calendar, and before each planting offerings are made, a drop of blood, a whisper to the maize god Hunhunapu, a flick of incense into the wind. For the Maya, maize is not just food, it is origin, identity, flesh. According to their mythology, humans were created from maize, and every kernel holds a trace of divine memory. Alongside farming, many households engage in craft production. A father carves shell into ornaments, or knaps obsidian blades for ritual and trade. His wife weaves cotton into garments dyed with natural pigments, indigo, cochineal and anato, each colour holding symbolic weight. Social status is reflected not in gold or jewels, but in patterns and materials. A noble might wear a finely woven huipil embroidered with cosmological glyphs. A commoner wears simpler garb but no less dignified in function and form. Artisans form guilds of sorts, their knowledge passed down through generations. Some families specialise in pottery, creating elegant polychrome vessels adorned with mythic scenes and courtly portraits. Others are muralists or stone carvers, brought into city centres for large commissions. Yet even those who never carve a stela or paint a king's tomb carry the stories. They hum them while grinding corn, they trace them in the dirt for their children, they weave them into the hems of tunics. The city itself pulses with activity beyond its temples. Markets erupt in open plazas, cacophonous, fragrant, alive. Merchants from nearby villages and distant lands bring salt, dried fish, obsidian blades, jaguar pelts, jade beads, honey, chili, feathers, tools, and woven mats. Bartering is complex, informed by long-standing trade relationships and an intuitive sense of value. Cacao beans, often used as currency, jingle in pouches. Nobles stroll the markets escorted by servants, selecting prestige goods for feasts or offerings. The wealthy live in larger homes with elevated platforms and multiple rooms, often with small shrines or altars. Nobility and artisans may live close to city centres, their dwellings adorned with decorative stucco, their gardens lush with medicinal herbs and flowering trees. Education exists, but is reserved for elite males destined for priesthood or administration. These children learn glyphs, mathematics, astronomy, and ritual. They memorize complex genealogies and creation myths, practicing the art of divination and public oration. Maya numerals are base 20 and use a combination of dots and bars with the sacred shell symbol for 0, one of the earliest conceptions of the 0 in human history. Their astronomy is astonishingly accurate. They track Venus cycles, lunar phases, eclipses, solstices, and equinoxes, with methods passed down and refined over centuries. Religion saturates everything. Every household has altars, every journey is made with a prayer, Every illness is a sign from the gods, treated by shamans with herbs, chants, and sometimes bloodletting. Life and death are not opposites but stages in a sacred continuum. Ancestors are buried beneath houses or in nearby cemeteries, their spirits believed to linger and advise the living. Death is not feared but ritualized. Funerary bundles are adorned with jade, masks, and sacred objects to prepare the soul for Jibalba, the underworld of trials and rebirth. Festivals are frequent and vibrant, celebrations of agricultural cycles, celestial alignments, and dynastic anniversaries. They involve feasting, dancing, music, incense, offerings, and sometimes human sacrifice. These were not brutal spectacles, but acts of cosmic responsibility. The gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world. Humans returned the gift with measured reciprocity. Music is everywhere: drums, flutes, conch shells, maracas. Dancers wear elaborate headdresses and body paint, transforming themselves into gods or mythic beasts. Every motion, every costume, every beat of the drum has meaning. And love too thrives in this world. Arranged marriages for the nobility, love matches among commoners, quiet courtship at the market, whispered poems by moonlight, partnerships forged in ritual and sustained by kinship. Maya society is complex but not rigid. There is mobility. An artisan may rise to court favour through skill. A warrior may earn prestige and land. A scribe may influence dynastic politics through the cleverness of his glyphs. And across it all, the jungle whispers, the howl of monkeys, the cry of birds, the rustle of jaguars in the underbrush. The Maya do not dominate the forest. They live within it, coaxing it, honouring it. Their buildings do not destroy the jungle but rise from it like sacred growths. Their roads curve to respect terrain. Their cosmology does not seek to escape nature, but to understand and harmonize with it. And so, while kings duel across Stele, and gods descend in dreams to court astrologers and priests, the Maya people continue their daily rituals. Planting, carving, weaving, feasting, remembering. They are not just the background of history, they are its breath. To understand the Maya is to understand their relationship with time, not as a simple ledger of days past or a countdown to some distant apocalypse, but as a living, breathing organism, coiled like a serpent and layered like a temple, with meaning in every fold. The Maya did not just measure time, they worshipped it, sculpted it, harmonized with it. Their calendars were not merely tools, they were sacred mirrors reflecting the will of gods, the rhythm of the cosmos, and the pulse of the human soul. Time was divine architecture, and every date was a stone laid in its sacred geometry. Central to their system was the Tzolk'in, the 260-day sacred calendar, whose origins remain mysterious. Some believe it mirrors the human gestation period, others that it was derived from complex celestial calculations. Whatever its source, the Tzolk'in governed the spiritual lives of the Maya. It consisted of 20 named days, each paired with a number from 1 to 13, cycling together in a rolling sequence that produced a total of 260 unique combinations. Each combination held specific energies, auspices, and associations. It was not simply the day's name, it was the day's soul, its destiny. A child born on 4 Ajor might be blessed with charisma and leadership. One born on 11 Kan could be tied to prosperity or mischief. Rituals were aligned to these dates. Marriages, inaugurations, offerings, and sacrifices were chosen not arbitrarily, but in consultation with the Tzolk'in, often with the guidance of a daykeeper, a priest or diviner trained to interpret its currents. Running alongside the Tzolk'in was the Hab, the solar calendar of 365 days. This was a more earthly rhythm, tracking the seasons and agricultural cycles. It consisted of 18 months of 20 days each, plus a short 5-day month called Wayeb, a period considered dangerous and spiritually thin when boundaries between worlds blurred and misfortune was likely. The Hab named its days differently. Instead of 13 numbers and 20 names, each Hab date featured a day number followed by a month name, such as 3 Pop or 19 Sots. Every 52 Hab years, about every 18,980 days, the Tzolk'in and Hab realigned, completing what the Maya called a calendar round. This was a sacred turning, like the resetting of cosmic gears. Great rituals marked these moments, including the new fire ceremony, where old fires were extinguished and new ones lit, both literally in households and figuratively in the celestial cycle. Yet for history, for kings, for gods and myths, the Maya required something more enduring than 260-day and 365-day cycles. And so, they invented the long count, a mathematical marvel, a linear count of days since the mythic creation date, which they placed at 13.000004 Ajorwait Kumku, equivalent to August 11th, 3114 BC in the Gregorian calendar. From that point forward, every major event could be dated precisely in 5 nested units: Baktun, 144,000 days, Katun, 7,200 days, Tun, 360 days, Weinel, 20 days, and Kien, 1 day. A stealer might declare, for example, that on 9/16/4/10/8/12 Lamatsik Sak, the king of Copan captured a rival lord and dedicated a new temple. Each glyph is not just a timestamp, it is a cosmic chord, resonating with the mythic past and anchoring the act in sacred legitimacy. The Maya did not see time as linear in the way modern minds might. It was cyclical, recursive, fractal. Just as the sun returns after night and the rains after dry season, so too do eras return, patterns repeat, energies spiral back with new faces but old souls. They believed in great cycles, Baktuns, Pictuns, Kalabtuns, that unfolded over millennia. They were acutely aware of astronomical cycles, the synodic periods of Venus and Mars, the eclipses of the moon, the precession of the equinoxes. Their observatories, like the Caracol at Chichen Itza or the E-group structures at Washaktun, were aligned to solstices, equinoxes, and planetary risings with breathtaking precision. Venus was especially important. The Maya tracked its phases as the morning star and evening star with unmatched accuracy, using it to plan wars, rituals, and coronations. Some glyphs even suggest entire battles were delayed or launched based on the appearance or disappearance of Venus in the sky. They saw in Venus not just a planet, but a god of dual nature, beautiful and deadly, herald of rebirth and destruction. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Maya manuscripts, contains tables predicting Venus's movements over 104 years with only minute errors. And in their stone inscriptions, we see this attention not just to astronomy but to theology. The sky was not a neutral canvas. It was a scripture written in light. Lunar eclipses, tracked with astonishing fidelity, were portents of danger or divine anger. Solar alignments were moments of power when gods walked among men. The Maya developed a kind of sacred historiography, recording not only what happened, but when it happened, so that its timing became part of its meaning. Time was layered. A single event might be marked by its long count date, its Tzolk'in combination, its Harb placement, and its lunar phase, all nested like ceremonial masks. To read a Maya inscription is to read a moment folded in multiple dimensions, thick with metaphor, mathematics, and myth. And so they built cities as calendars. At Copan, the 16 stelae of the hieroglyphic stairway temple may represent 16 kings of the dynasty, each commemorating a Baktun. At Ixmal, buildings align to Venus's extremes. At Chichen Itza, the Great Pyramid of Kukulkan casts a serpent-shaped shadow during the equinox, an architectural feat blending light, stone and myth into a singular moment of cosmic theatre. Time was not abstract. It had weight, temperature, spirit. It was not when, it was who. And in this worldview, to act out of sync with time was not merely unwise, it was sacrilege. Kings who ignored calendar omens might face rebellion, drought, or disease. Even in collapse, the Maya clung to their calendars. As cities fell and dynasties crumbled, the glyphs continued. The scribes recorded not just defeats, but their dates, so future generations would understand the shape of their fall in sacred rhythm. And today, long after those scribes turn to dust, we can still read their days. We know when they were born, when they danced before gods, when they bled for rain, when they built their greatest temples, and when they died. Time has not forgotten them because they etched themselves into time. To understand the Maya is to understand their words, not merely spoken, but carved, painted, and inscribed in a script so intricate and beautiful it was long mistaken for purely decorative art. Their writing system, hieroglyphic and hauntingly poetic, was one of the most sophisticated in the pre-Columbian world, capable of conveying not just names and dates, but myth, prayer, history, and song. It adorned their temples and palaces, whispered along the rims of drinking vessels, curled like smoke across codices folded from bark and sealed in deerskin. And for centuries after the cities fell and the jungle reclaimed the plazas, the meaning of those glyphs lay dormant, waiting to be read again. The Maya script is logosyllabic, meaning it combines logograms, symbols that represent whole words or ideas, and syllabic signs that represent individual sounds. A single glyph block might contain both a logogram for king and syllabic signs spelling out the ruler's name, all stylized with artistic flair so that even a single block can look like a miniature sculpture. Glyphs were often arranged in paired columns, read left to right, top to bottom in zigzag fashion. To the untrained eye, it seems decorative. To the Maya, it was language, dense, layered, recursive. For centuries, decipherment eluded modern scholars. The earliest efforts in the 19th and early 20th centuries focused on identifying calendrical information. Dates and numbers were the first to yield. The presence of the long count made it possible to establish timelines even when names and verbs remained opaque. Scholars like Ernst Fürstemann could match numerical values to known celestial cycles and codices, but the meanings of names, places, and events remained locked away. Then came a revolution, quiet but relentless. In the mid-20th century, Russian linguist Yuri Knorozov proposed that many glyphs were phonetic, based on syllables rather than just whole words or concepts. His ideas were initially dismissed by American scholars who insisted Maya writing was ideographic, a symbolic system devoid of spoken equivalents. But Norozov's work was vindicated in the 1980s as more syllabic readings proved consistent and the veil began to lift. Scholars like Linda Sheely, David Stewart and Nikolai Gruby further advanced the field, revealing a vibrant tapestry of rulers, wars, rituals and myths. The names of kings like Kinich Janab Pakal of Palenque, Yaks Nun Ayin of Tikal, or Waksa Klajun Uba Kawil of Kopan emerged from the glyphs like ancient voices returning from centuries of silence. We now know that Maya writing was not limited to elite monuments. It adorned ceramics, murals, jewellery, and most significantly, books. The Maya codices, made from fig bark paper coated in lime plaster and folded accordion style, contained astronomical tables, ritual instructions, almanacs, and genealogies. Of the thousands that once existed, only 4 survived the flames of Spanish conquest: the Dresden Codex, Madrid Codex, Paris Codex, and the recently authenticated Grolier Codex. These are among the most precious books on earth, not because they are rare, but because they are fragments of a worldview so different from our own, yet so exquisitely human. The writing preserved stories both mythic and mundane. The Popol Vuh, though not written in glyphs but later in Latin script by Quiché Maya scribes, is informed by the same tradition. A cosmic drama of twin gods, trickster lords of the underworld, May's resurrection, and the sacred ball game. The glyphs on stelae and altars echo these themes, weaving history into myth. Kings model themselves on gods, wars mirror celestial conflict, architecture becomes cosmogram. Even individual events, births, marriages, battles, are embedded within sacred time, their dates chosen not for convenience but for cosmic resonance. Maya glyphs also captured the essence of political propaganda. When a city like Dos Pilas commemorated its victory over a rival, it was not enough to say it happened. They recorded the captives' names, the stars that oversaw the battle, the gods invoked before the march, the blood offerings made after. These were not mere boasts. They were acts of ritual reaffirmation, inscribed in stone so the gods and future generations would remember. Deciphered glyphs reveal a society obsessed with legitimacy and continuity. Rulers trace their lineages back centuries, sometimes to mythic ancestors. They assert ties to more powerful cities or gods. They document rituals not just to celebrate them, but to prove them. On this date, this king did this, at this place, witnessed by these gods. And yet, for all its grandeur, Maya writing could be deeply personal. On a ceramic drinking cup, a glyph might read, "The cacao drink of the Holy Lord of Naranjo," marking both ownership and intimacy. Another might declare, "This is the bowl of Yaks Balam," a quiet voice echoing across time, a name preserved in fired clay. The Maya loved wordplay, poetic kennings, and layered meanings. Glyphs often carried double or triple readings. A symbol might represent both a word and its metaphor, a sound and its sacred counterpart. This made inscriptions as much art as language, dense with puns, allusions, and visual metaphors. Modern epigraphers approach them like musicians reading a score, attuned not just to literal meaning but to rhythm, tone, and resonance. The rediscovery of Maya writing has been a triumph of cross-cultural scholarship, often aided by Maya communities themselves. In recent decades, indigenous scholars and artists have reclaimed the script, teaching it in schools, using it in murals, reinscribing it into modern culture. Far from being a dead language, it is now a symbol of survival, resistance, and continuity. Some even compose new texts in the ancient style, continuing the story where the last stela left off. And still, many glyphs remain undeciphered, enigmatic symbols whose sounds or meanings elude us, whispers just beyond the edge of hearing. But every year, more becomes clear. Every broken monument or looted artifact is a potential page waiting to be read. The Maya did not write to impress future archaeologists. They wrote because it mattered, because to name something is to make it real, to remember is to revere, and to inscribe the divine is to keep the universe turning. In stone, in clay, in bark, they wrote the shape of time, the map of gods, the sorrow of wars, the joy of maize harvests, the pride of lineage, and the ache of loss. And in deciphering their script, we are not just reading history. We are eavesdropping on an ancient dream, the soft syllables of a people who refused to be forgotten. To truly understand the world of the ancient Maya, one must abandon the tidy linearity of modern religious thought and step into a cosmos that breathed in cycles, draped itself in metaphor, and pulsed with unseen energies flowing between gods, humans, animals, and even architecture. The Maya cosmos was a living, interwoven organism, its roots dug deep into the watery underworld, its branches arched into the star-flecked heavens, and its trunk, our earthly plane, anchoring the two in sacred equilibrium. Their spiritual worldview was not abstract. It was enacted daily in rituals, carved into monuments, sung by priests, and danced into the plaza dust. The universe was conceived as a three-part structure: the heavens above, segmented into 13 layers, the earthly realm in the middle, and the underworld, or Xibalba, below, typically composed of 9 layers. These levels were populated by gods, ancestors, spirits, and demons, all of whom interacted with the living in ways both benevolent and perilous. The central axis connecting all realms was the world tree, often envisioned as a ceiba, with its roots in the underworld and canopy in the heavens. This sacred tree appeared in art and architecture, with temples and pyramids acting as terrestrial versions, symbolic conduits through which kings and priests could mediate between planes. At the heart of Maya religion was the act of sustaining the balance of this cosmos, a duty shared by deities and mortals alike. Blood sacrifice, both auto-sacrifice by rulers and offerings of captives, was a central component. Blood was seen as the food of the gods, the vital essence that kept the sun moving, the rains falling, the maize growing. Kings would pierce their tongues or genitals, collecting blood on bark paper which was then burned, releasing its sacred smoke to the heavens. Captive sacrifice, particularly by decapitation or heart removal, was reserved for grand rituals, often tied to astronomical events, dynastic anniversaries, or temple dedications. These acts were not murder, they were cosmic maintenance, part of a divine bargain struck in the mythic past when the gods themselves first shed blood to birth the world. The gods of the Maya pantheon were many and mutable, often manifesting in multiple forms depending on context, ritual, or calendrical placement. Among the most prominent was Itzamna, the high god of wisdom, writing, and the sky, often shown as an aged figure with a prominent Roman nose and square eye. His consort Ixchel was a moon goddess associated with fertility, childbirth, weaving, and healing. She could appear as a nurturing grandmother or a terrifying crone pouring floods from an upturned jar. Then there was Chak, the storm god, who wielded lightning axes and lived in the mountains. He was revered by farmers, for his rains nourished the maize, but also feared, for droughts and storms were his tantrums. Kinichahau, the sun god, was a powerful figure tied to royal authority. Depicted with a kin's sun glyph on his forehead, he journeyed across the sky each day, only to descend into Xibalba at night, where he battled the forces of darkness before rising anew. The hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, featured prominently in the Popol Vuh, the Quiché Maya creation epic. Their myth, which involved trickery, sacrifice, and resurrection in the underworld, was a metaphor for solar cycles, maize regrowth, and the eternal dance of life and death. Their story was mirrored in temple art and even reenacted in ball games, which themselves were sacred rituals, arenas not of sport but of cosmic drama, where players reenacted the trials of gods and sometimes ended with human sacrifice. Every building, artifact, and performance had spiritual meaning. Temples were not just places of worship, they were literal stages for divine interaction. Their alignment with celestial bodies ensured that rituals coincided with moments of heightened cosmic energy. A priest standing atop a pyramid during a solstice sunrise was not just performing a rite, he was bridging heaven and earth, echoing the god's original acts. Masks worn during ceremonies did not represent gods, they became gods. The wearer was temporarily possessed, their voice and body inhabited by divine presence. These rituals were not rare, they were constant. From the grand festivals of the nobility to the household offerings of commoners, the spiritual realm infused every aspect of Maya life. Even meals could be votive. Tortillas shaped with glyphs, chocolate drinks blessed before consumption, altars placed in kitchens and fields. Ancestors, too, were ever present. Maya believed that the dead, if properly honoured, continued to participate in the world. Burials beneath homes, offerings at grave sites, and the careful recording of genealogies all spoke to this relationship. A king's legitimacy was not merely inherited, it was enacted through communion with his forebears, whose spirits could be summoned in dreams, trances, or ritual spaces. Ritual specialists, priests, shamans, and daykeepers were essential intermediaries. They understood the sacred calendar, the proper chants and offerings, the placement of altars, the significance of animal omens and dream visions. Their knowledge was passed down through lineages, often held in secret and protected from colonial scrutiny. Even today, in highland Guatemala and parts of Yucatan, modern Maya communities preserve fragments of this ancient cosmology, burning copal, consulting sacred bundles, and honouring mountain spirits. The collapse of the classic Maya cities did not erase their religion, it transformed it. In the face of Spanish conquest, many rituals were driven underground, syncretized with Catholic saints, or preserved in oral traditions. But the essence remained, a reverence for time, nature, ancestry, and the dance of cycles. The Maya did not separate the sacred from the secular. They lived their cosmology, in the maize sprouting from milpa soil, in the thunderheads building over jungle ridges, in the glyphs etched into stele or whispered through prayer. They saw the fingerprints of the divine. Their religion was not a system, it was a conversation, ongoing and alive, and through the persistence of their stories it continues to speak. In the shadows of pyramids and beneath the weight of elaborately carved stele, the political landscape of the ancient Maya was anything but simple. It was a swirling, ever-evolving web of dynastic ambition, ritual performance, diplomatic alliance, betrayal, and blood-soaked conquest. Contrary to the popular conception of a unified empire, the Maya were a constellation of fiercely independent city-states, each governed by its own divine ruler, or Kuhula Jao, a term meaning holy lord, one that denoted not only temporal authority but spiritual responsibility. These kings were not merely administrators, they were living links between the immortal realm and the gods, tasked with sustaining the cosmic order through acts of ritual, sacrifice, and public spectacle. At the heart of each city-state lay its ceremonial core, towering pyramids, sprawling palace complexes, ball courts, reservoirs, and plazas, all designed not only to serve the daily functions of governance, but to manifest a sacred geography. The palace was a place of bureaucracy and strategy, yes, but also of dreams and omens, where astrologers plotted royal decisions based on celestial movements, and where priests and nobles conducted elaborate rites to reaffirm the ruler's legitimacy. These courts were complex social organisms, full of scribes, artists, warriors, court dwarfs, emissaries, noble women, and retainers, each with defined roles and immense pride. Power among the Maya was often hereditary, but not automatically so. Succession could be contested, and ambitious princes sometimes had to prove their worth through military victories, strategic marriages, or alignment with influential lineages. Women could hold significant power as well. While rarely kings themselves, they often served as regents, political advisors, or priestesses. In rare but noteworthy instances, women like Lady Cable of El Peru Waka even ruled in their own right, bearing the full regalia and titles of kingship. The political sphere was inextricably tied to warfare. Battles were not just territorial disputes, they were ritual performances of cosmic resonance. Captives were paraded, interrogated, and ultimately sacrificed, their fates recorded in painstaking glyphic detail. Wars were sometimes sparked by affronts to honour, broken alliances or resource competition, but often they were deeply ceremonial, timed to celestial events, and imbued with spiritual significance. Victories were immortalized in stone, enemy lords shown kneeling, their hands bound, beneath the towering forms of victorious kings. Yet while war was ever present, so too was diplomacy. Maya rulers maintained a complex system of alliances through marriage, trade, and ritual gift exchange. Obsidian, jade, cacao, feathers, textiles, and even sacred books travelled hundreds of miles along jungle routes and rivers, knitting the region into a loosely interconnected political tapestry. Diplomatic envoys, often relatives of kings, were dispatched to negotiate treaties or officiate at coronations. Some cities formed durable hegemonies, exerting influence over smaller polities for generations. Tikal and Kalakmul in particular emerged as superpowers, locked in a centuries-long rivalry that saw shifting alliances, proxy wars, and monumental shifts in power. These great powers did not simply conquer, they absorbed, co-opted, and symbolically devoured their rivals. A smaller city defeated in war might continue to exist, but under the political and religious sway of its conqueror, its monuments carved in a new stylistic dialect, its kings renamed or replaced. The reigns of kings were marked not just by military prowess, but by the execution of sacred duties. They presided over calendar rituals, maize festivals, rain ceremonies, and rites of renewal. Coronations themselves were cosmic events, often coinciding with eclipses, equinoxes, or Katun endings in the calendar. A new king might fast, undergo ritual bloodletting, or spend days in seclusion before emerging in full regalia to be anointed before the gods. His deeds, ancestors and divine patrons were proclaimed by scribes and inscribed in stone. His reign was expected to echo the feats of mythic ancestors and celestial beings. Even the urban layout reflected the political order. Roads called sakbiob, white roads made of crushed limestone, linked ceremonial centres to outlying sites, often extending the symbolic reach of royal authority. Boundary stele declared dominion, sometimes located in contested wilderness between rival cities. These were not merely markers, they were magical defences, blessed and guarded by spiritual forces, meant to extend the aura of rulership beyond physical sight. When dynasties collapsed, whether due to defeat, internal conflict, or dynastic exhaustion, the loss was more than political. It was a spiritual rupture. Monuments ceased to be carved, temples were left unfinished, and royal tombs remained empty. The failure to uphold sacred kingship threatened the very balance of the cosmos, and yet some cities recovered. Copan, for example, suffered a dynastic crisis around 738 AD when its powerful ruler Washaklajun Ub-ah-Kawil was captured and sacrificed by a vassal. But the city persisted, under new rulers who reframed its history and repurposed old symbols to assert continuity. These shifts are visible in the art. Broken lines of kings re-established, old names revived, new temples erected atop old ones. The palace was never still. It was always becoming. Politics in the Maya world was therefore not simply the pursuit of power. It was the orchestration of meaning. Kings were not merely men. They were metaphors, personifications of the sun, the maize god, or the mythic ancestors. Their births were cosmic signs, their deaths solar eclipses, their rituals reenactments of creation. The Maya believed that to rule was to participate in the story of the universe. And as we read their monuments today, piece together their inscriptions and trace their dynastic lineages, we are not just learning about ancient politics, we are listening to a theatre of gods and kings, a ballet of blood and brilliance played out in limestone and memory. To step into a Maya city at the height of its splendour was to step into a world that pulsed with symbolic meaning, vibrant colour, and dizzying craftsmanship. A place where every building told a story, every mural whispered cosmic secrets, and every glyph carved in stone was part of an ongoing conversation with time, divinity, and the ancestors. Maya art and architecture were not ancillary to their civilization. They were central to it, woven into the very structure of society, spirituality, and power. These cities, Tikal, Palenque, Yaxchilan, Copan, Calakmul, and dozens of others, were not designed haphazardly, but with a complex spatial grammar dictated by cosmological belief and ritual necessity. The tallest structures, usually stepped pyramids capped with temples, represented sacred mountains, places where gods descended and kings ascended. These temples were oriented with celestial precision, often aligned to solar events such as equinoxes, solstices, or the zenith passage of the sun, a phenomenon unique to the tropics that held special calendrical significance. The buildings were clad in stucco and originally painted in riotous colour. Brilliant reds, deep blues, sunlit yellows, and dark blacks that delineated the underworld. These hues were not decorative, they were charged with meaning. Red, for example, was associated with the east, the rising sun, and birth, black with the west and death. The temples were not the only impressive features. Palaces sprawled low and wide, full of vaulted corridors, courtyards, and throne rooms. Their walls were inscribed with glyphs recording the deeds of kings, and their facades bore intricate masks of deities, often the sun god or the Vitz monster, a mountain spirit whose gaping jaws framed the entrances to tombs and sanctuaries. The Maya perfected corbelled arches, allowing for interior spaces that echoed like sacred caves. Their architectural mastery extended to complex water management systems, aqueducts, reservoirs, and drainage that supported dense urban populations in challenging environments. But it was perhaps in sculpture and relief carving that Maya artistry most vividly captured the fusion of myth, history, and identity. Monumental stelae, upright stone slabs sometimes over 10 feet tall, were erected in plazas and at city entrances to commemorate significant events. Battles, royal ascensions, calendrical anniversaries. These were not generic records. They were deeply personal, often showing the ruler in elaborate garb, adorned with headdresses bristling with quetzal feathers, jaguar pelts, jade ornaments, and belts woven from the symbols of time itself. In his hands he might hold a ceremonial bar from which emerged serpents vomiting ancestral spirits. Around him danced glyphs, telling the story of his lineage, his deeds, and his relationship with the gods. These stelae were paired with altars, often circular or quatrefoil, shaped to represent portals between worlds, on which blood offerings and other sacrifices were made. The Maya also decorated their buildings with narrative panels and lintels, horizontal stone slabs placed over doorways. Some of the most exquisite are from Yaxchilan, where queens are shown conjuring gods through bloodletting rituals, pulling thorn-laced ropes through their tongues as serpents curl into the air, opening their jaws to release ancestral warriors. These scenes are intimate yet monumental, visceral yet divine, rendered with exquisite anatomical detail and dynamic composition. Murals, though rarer due to the ravages of time and humidity, offer equally profound insights. At Bonampak, a series of murals in a small temple show an entire courtly cycle. Musicians playing, nobles dancing, warriors presenting captives, priests conducting sacrifice, all painted with a mastery of form, shading, and movement that rivals Renaissance frescoes. These murals were not just art, they were political theatre, cosmological maps, and mnemonic devices, helping encode ritual knowledge across generations. And then there were the ceramics, painted vessels, incense burners, plates, and effigy figurines used in elite households and ritual contexts. Many bore glyphic texts that named the object's owner, its purpose, and even the drink it once contained. A drinking cup might read, "This is the cacao vessel of so-and-so, lord of such and such." Others depicted mythic scenes, gods interacting with humans, the hero twins in the underworld, or courtly banquets with seated kings and scribes. These were not mass-produced, they were individually crafted, often by artists whose names survive in inscriptions. The artisans themselves, sculptors, painters, scribes, were not anonymous labourers but respected members of the court, sometimes with their own lineages and apprenticeships. One artist from Copan, for example, signed his work with the glyph for Sak Chuan, white artisan monkey, a name that connects him to the patron deity of artists and scribes, often depicted as a monkey wielding a paintbrush or carving tool. This intimate link between art and identity, creator and cosmos, pervaded every brushstroke and chisel mark. The Maya did not separate aesthetic from function, nor beauty from spirituality. A building was not merely a shelter, it was a story, a symbol, a ritual actor. An incense burner was not just a tool, It was a microcosm, a house for gods, a vessel through which the sacred could manifest. Every motif carried layers of meaning. The matte symbol beneath a king's throne evoked authority and lineage. The quatrefoil portal suggested a watery threshold to Xibalba. The jaguar's pelt, worn by warriors and priests, embodied the power of night and the forest. Their art was not static. It moved, changed, and responded to political shifts, dynastic upheavals, and regional styles. The ornate Baroque forms of the Puc region in northern Yucatan differed from the starkly geometric facades of the southern lowlands. The incense-swirled dens of Palenque evoked a different sacred atmosphere than the sun-scorched courtyards of Uxmal. And even within a single site, styles could shift over time as new rulers brought new artisans, influences and ideologies. Today, much of this art is silent, its paint faded, its glyphs eroded, its meanings obscured by time and conquest. But through painstaking study, archaeologists, epigraphers, and Maya communities themselves are reanimating these voices. They are decoding the visual grammar, re-singing the songs etched in stone, and restoring the grandeur of a civilization that once spoke to the gods through jade, stucco, fire, and shadow. In the end, to walk through a Maya site is not just to see ruins, it is to enter a library of myth and memory, where every surface once shimmered with sacred intent. Beneath the spiritual grandeur and dynastic drama of the Maya world thrummed a quieter, but no less powerful engine: trade. A network of exchange so vast, so intricate, and so robust that it connected rainforest hamlets with highland kingdoms, coastal ports with mountaintop shrines, and elite palaces with everyday households through a ceaseless circulation of goods, materials, ideas, and prestige. The Maya economy was not a market economy in the modern sense. There were no coins or formal banks, no centralized marketplaces regulated by a state. But it was an economy nonetheless, driven by need, ritual, status, and social obligation. At its heart was reciprocity. The idea that goods and services flowed not just for profit but for honor, for kinship, and for maintaining balance in a world that valued cosmic symmetry as much as material sustenance. The core of Maya trade was built on the movement of essential goods: maize, beans, squash, chili peppers, and salt, all of which sustained daily life. These were grown or harvested locally, but regional differences in soil, rainfall, and access to coastal resources meant that trade routes developed early on to move staple commodities across ecological zones. Salt, for instance, was crucial, not only for flavor but for food preservation, and sites near salt flats or coastal lagoons became important distribution centers, sending brine and salt cakes inland in exchange for textiles, ceramics, or dried fish. Beyond the basics, the Maya developed complex circuits for luxury goods, the lifeblood of elite society and ritual life. Obsidian, a volcanic glass sharper than surgical steel, was used for cutting tools, weapons, and ritual bloodletting instruments. Though Mesoamerica is home to several obsidian sources, the most prized varieties, green from Pachuca, black from El Chayal, travelled hundreds of miles, their roots traceable today by chemical analysis. Similarly, jade, the sacred green stone associated with life, rain, and royal authority, was quarried in the Motagua Valley of present-day Guatemala and dispersed to cities as distant as Copan and Chichen Itza. It adorned tombs, pectorals, ear spools, masks, and even teeth, drilled and inlaid with tiny jade plugs to denote status. Feathers, especially from the resplendent quetzal, were prized for their shimmering emerald hues. These birds, sacred and elusive, were native to the cloud forests of southern Mesoamerica, and their feathers were painstakingly plucked from live specimens. Killing a quetzal was taboo. The feathers, delicate and ethereal, were woven into headdresses, capes, and ritual fans, worn only by kings, priests, and gods. Then there was cacao, the bitter, sacred seed of the gods, used to make a rich, frothy drink imbued with spiritual potency. Grown in the lowland rainforests, cacao was so valued that it became a de facto currency among the elite. Painted ceramic cups proclaimed their use as cacao vessels, and records described tribute payments in beans. The Maya didn't just trade raw goods, they traded knowledge, techniques, and artistic styles. Iconography from one region shows up on pottery from another. Architectural motifs migrate across hundreds of miles, suggesting not just commerce but cultural conversation. Traders themselves, known as polom, were respected figures, sometimes operating in kin groups or guild-like associations. They travelled on foot or by canoe, bearing loads of goods in wooden backpacks called tumplines, navigating treacherous jungle paths, crossing rivers, and enduring both natural and human hazards. Along their routes were rest stops and way stations, small communities that sprang up not just as supply depots but as hubs of exchange, cultural mixing bowls where dialects blurred and alliances were forged. These trade networks stitched together the Maya world into something more than a series of isolated city-states. They created a kind of commercial confederacy, elastic and fluid, but deeply binding. Some cities leveraged geography to become economic powerhouses. Calakmul, located near major overland routes, developed extensive connections to both highland and coastal zones. Chunchukmil in the Yucatan is now believed to have supported a population far beyond what its agricultural base could sustain, suggesting that it thrived primarily as a trading hub, importing food in exchange for salt and other local products. Coastal cities like Koba or Scambo controlled maritime trade, dispatching fleets of dugout canoes laden with textiles, ceramics, smoked fish, and salt along the Gulf and Caribbean coasts, connecting the Maya to distant peoples, including those of central Mexico and the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Markets in the Maya world were vibrant, multi-sensory affairs. Archaeological evidence at some sites points to designated market areas, open plazas ringed with stalls or shaded by awnings where goods were bartered and news exchanged. These markets weren't chaotic free-for-alls, they were highly regulated, often overseen by local authorities or religious figures who maintained fairness and order. Market days were often tied to the calendar, imbued with ritual significance and accompanied by performances, ceremonies, or offerings to deities of commerce like Ekchua, the black-painted god of cacao, trade, and travellers. The Maya also practiced tribute and redistribution systems. Conquered or allied cities paid tribute to dominant centres, which then redistributed those goods to allies, nobles, or temples. This created a vertical integration of trade and power, with royal courts functioning as both religious epicenters and economic engines. Temples, after all, were not just places of prayer, they were storage facilities, treasuries, and warehouses. Within their cool, dark chambers were stored not just bones of kings, but bolts of cloth, bundles of feathers, sacks of cacao, and jars of precious ointments. Trade even intersected with warfare. Raids were sometimes launched not just for conquest, but for access to trade routes or to seize prized goods and artisans. The spoils of war were paraded before the populace, their symbolic value often exceeding their practical use. A single jade necklace, for instance, could signify the subjugation of an entire region. Over time, as city-states rose and fell, these trade routes shifted, adapted, or collapsed. Drought, conflict, and internal upheaval disrupted supply chains, leading some centres to falter while others rose in their place. But even in decline, trade persisted. The echo of this mercantile web can still be felt in the pottery shards found far from their production sites, in the obsidian blades discovered in tombs 1,000 kilometres from their volcanic origin, and in the glyphs that speak of tribute, debt, and offering. In the end, the Maya economy was not just a system of material exchange, it was a living, breathing organism that undergirded every aspect of Maya life, from the divine to the domestic. Through trade, the Maya turned mountains into monuments, forests into finery, and goods into gods. In the grandeur of Maya cities, it is easy to be overwhelmed by the monumental scale of the pyramids, the intricate glyphs, the cosmological genius of their calendars, and the delicacy of their ceramics. And yet, beneath this tapestry of divine architecture and sacred kingship pulsed a far more terrestrial struggle, the balance between civilization and environment. The Maya were not immune to ecological consequence. Their very brilliance, their ability to build dense cities, support large populations, and transform wild terrain into organized agricultural landscapes, set the stage for a dramatic ecological reckoning, a tale written not just in stone but in soil, pollen, sediment cores, and charcoal layers. The Maya world, particularly in the southern lowlands, was not uniformly fertile. Much of it was tropical rainforest, with thin topsoil that could be quickly exhausted, and yet the Maya developed a wide array of agricultural techniques to exploit their varied landscapes. In the lowlands, they cleared swaths of forest to plant maize, beans, and squash, the three sisters of Mesoamerican subsistence. They built milpas, or shifting slash-and-burn fields, rotating plots to allow soil to recover. In wetter areas, they constructed raised fields, known as barjos, ringed by canals that prevented waterlogging and allowed for drainage and controlled irrigation. These innovations were clever and often sustainable on a small scale, but as population swelled and cities expanded, the pressure on the land grew. Trees were felled not only for new fields but to fuel the kilns that fired stucco, pottery and lime plaster. And it was lime plaster, used to coat temples, palaces, plazas and even elite homes, that became one of the most ecologically costly materials in the Maya world. Producing a single square metre of lime plaster required burning vast amounts of wood to reach the necessary temperatures. Multiplied across entire cities, entire generations, this led to massive deforestation. The loss of forest cover had cascading effects. Without the tree canopy, rainfall evaporated more quickly, soil eroded, and local microclimates changed. Sediment cores taken from lakes near major Maya cities show sudden increases in soil runoff and charcoal deposits, signs of massive deforestation and burning events. Pollen records reveal shifts from diverse forest species to fast-growing weeds and grasses, indicators of land under stress. In some areas, the very climate began to shift, not on a global scale, but in microclimatic patterns that affected rainfall, stream flow, and crop viability. Compounding these challenges were long-term droughts. Paleoclimatologists studying lake sediments, speleothems, cave stalagmites, and tree rings across Mesoamerica have found evidence of prolonged severe droughts occurring during the Terminal Classic period, the very time when many Maya cities began to collapse. These weren't just dry seasons, they were decades of reduced rainfall, broken monsoon patterns, and erratic weather that devastated crops and dried reservoirs. For a civilization so intimately tied to the rhythms of rain, their gods, their rituals, their planting cycles, such climatic shifts were not merely inconvenient, they were existential. The Maya had developed sophisticated water management systems to cope with seasonal rainfall. Cities like Tikal and Caracol engineered enormous reservoirs, complete with filtration systems and retaining walls. In some places, the placement of plazas and buildings directed runoff into catchment areas. But even these marvels of hydraulic engineering had their limits. When rains failed year after year, the stored water grew stagnant, disease-prone, or simply ran out. And as water became scarcer, its control became a source of political power and conflict. Kings who had once promised fertility, rainfall, and cosmic order found themselves unable to deliver. The gods seemed distant, the rituals ineffective. The divine legitimacy of the ruling class began to erode, and with it, the cohesion of their polities. Environmental degradation did not occur in a vacuum. It intersected with social, political, and economic stresses. As the agricultural hinterlands faltered, cities found it harder to feed their populations, trade routes shifted or collapsed, temples were left unfinished, and stelae ceased to be erected. Some cities were abandoned altogether, others shrank dramatically. In a painful irony, the very success of Maya civilization, their ability to support large urban populations, build monumental architecture, and maintain complex social hierarchies, made them more vulnerable to environmental stress. They had pushed their ecosystems to the edge, and when the climate wavered, the system cracked. But it would be wrong to see this collapse as sudden or total. The decline was uneven, stretched over centuries, and many Maya cities in the north, such as Uxmal and Chichen Itza, continued to thrive even as southern centers faltered. Some adapted their agricultural practices, others migrated to regions with more reliable water sources or better soil. What we see is not a doomsday scenario, but a slow, painful reconfiguration of a civilization under pressure. And despite the environmental devastation, the Maya never disappeared. Their descendants remain in Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, still farming maize, still telling stories, still performing rituals tied to the cycles of rain and sun. In their oral histories, their festivals, and their resistance to colonization, they carried forward a knowledge of balance, a lesson carved not only into the stones of Tikal or the murals of Bonampak, but into the very land itself, a testament to the price of brilliance when divorced from ecological foresight, and the enduring wisdom of a people who learned to live once more with the rain. As the sun began to set on the great classic Maya cities of the southern lowlands, the decline was neither sudden nor simple. It was slow and uneven, like the smouldering coals of a fire that had once roared across the forest canopy. This was not the apocalypse of Hollywood dramatization or textbook oversimplification. It was the unraveling of a complex tapestry of social, political, spiritual, and ecological threads that had held Maya civilization together for centuries. At the heart of this decline was the erosion of faith in kings, in rituals, in the very fabric of cosmic order that once gave Maya life its meaning. The rulers of the classic period were more than administrators or military commanders. They were semi-divine beings who stood as intermediaries between the human and supernatural worlds. Their legitimacy was bound up in ceremony, in bloodletting, in the conjuring of ancestral spirits through vision serpents and hallucinogenic trances. They promised rain through sacrifice, prosperity through calendrical precision, and social harmony through their connection to the gods. But when the rains failed, when crops withered in the fields, and when reservoirs dried to cracked stone, that sacred trust began to fray. The public rituals that had once assured cosmic balance now rang hollow. Stele, once inscribed with glorious victories and kingly genealogies, began to fall silent. In the archaeological record, we see a sudden drop in monument production, a poignant silence where once there had been endless proclamations of power. This silence speaks volumes. It suggests not only economic strain but a deep cultural disillusionment. Rulers no longer commissioned monuments because their power was waning, their legitimacy questioned, their people restless. Political factionalism began to rise. Dynasties that had held sway for generations began to splinter, challenged from within by ambitious nobles, warlords, or religious reformers. Civil war, often masked in the epic poetry of Stele, may have erupted in more than one city. Carved histories tell of betrayals, assassinations, rapid changes in leadership, and once strong alliances dissolving into rivalries. As political order fractured, so too did social cohesion. Elite palaces fell into disrepair, ceremonial centres were abandoned or reoccupied by squatters. The finely tuned choreography of elite life, feasting, gift exchange, marriage alliances, gave way to localism, improvisation, and survivalism. In some cases, commoners likely fled cities altogether, returning to smaller, more self-sufficient rural communities. These shifts weren't just physical, they were spiritual and psychological. The Maya worldview, once so sure of its cycles and certainties, faced a profound existential crisis. Without the divine kings to mediate the cosmos, and without the rituals to ensure fertility and harmony, the very order of the world seemed to be breaking down. Some communities may have turned to new deities, new practices, or even older, more localized traditions that had existed alongside royal religion, but had long been overshadowed. The vacuum left by the failing city-states created opportunities for ideological experimentation and renewal. Yet it also led to intensified competition for dwindling resources. Warfare, once ritualized and symbolic, may have become more desperate and destructive. The archaeological record shows signs of fortifications, mass graves, and burned buildings, suggesting real violence, not just ceremonial conflict. Cities like Dos Pilas, Aguateca, and Naranjo show evidence of sudden abandonment amid signs of battle. Whole populations may have been displaced, their cultural identity fractured by trauma and loss. Environmental pressures exacerbated the social unravelling. As previously discussed, deforestation, soil exhaustion, and drought created food shortages and water crises. These weren't just background conditions, they were catalysts. Hungry people are less likely to tolerate divine promises that go unfulfilled. Thirsty cities become powder kegs. The systems of tribute and redistribution that had once supported urban life began to collapse. without food flowing in from the hinterlands or goods arriving via trade routes, cities could not sustain their populations or their prestige. Power vacuums opened up. In some places, ambitious warlords filled the void, establishing short-lived kingdoms or cults. In others, religious leaders may have taken the reins, redirecting energy from dynastic ritual to communal survival. Still others saw their cities fade into the jungle, their stones reclaimed by vines, their plazas turned to pastures for howler monkeys and jaguars. And yet, this unravelling was not total. Some cities adapted, others migrated. Northern centres like Uxmal, Chichen Itza, and later Mayapan rose in prominence as southern sites faltered. The focus of power shifted from the deep jungles of the Petén to the drier, more stable Yucatan. Here, a different kind of politics emerged, less obsessed with divine kingship, more reliant on federated alliances, merchant networks, and shared religious spaces. This was not the rebirth of classic Maya civilization, but its transformation, a slow pivot into a new phase. Still, the legacy of the collapse haunted those who remained. The abandoned cities loomed as ghosts of a lost age. Their temples stood like skeletal remains, their glyphs unread, their gods silent. For centuries, the memory of this decline would linger in Maya oral histories, in cautionary tales, in the hesitancy of reoccupation. The fall of the classic Maya was not a singular moment, but a generational reckoning. It was the slow exhalation of a civilization that had grown too intricate, too dependent on unstable climates and divine promises, too entangled in its own rituals and rivalries. But in that unravelling, there is also a strange kind of beauty, a reminder that even the greatest civilizations are not immune to the forces of change, and that within every decline there is the seed of adaptation, of continuity, and of resilience. The Maya did not vanish. They changed. They survived. And in the ruins of their cities, in the language of their descendants, and in the ongoing decipherment of their glyphs, their story continues to unfold, one whisper at a time, echoing through the forest, carried on the wind. In the long shadow of the classic collapse, the story of the Maya did not end. It merely turned, as stories do, shifting its weight and finding new shapes in the dark. The post-classic period, stretching roughly from 900 to 1500 CE, was not the ghostly afterlife of a once great civilization, but a vibrant, adaptive, and politically innovative chapter in Maya history that deserves recognition not as decline, but as transformation. If the classic world was a kingdom of divine kingship, monumental city-states, and sacred calendars etched into limestone, the post-classic world was one of flexibility, federation, and the resilience of a people no longer tethered to the thunderous promises of semi-divine rulers. Following the abandonment or downsizing of southern lowland centres like Tikal, Copan, and Palenque, power shifted decisively northward to the Yucatan Peninsula. There, new polities arose, notably Uxmal, Chichen Itza, and later Mayapan, each representing a distinct political experiment. Uxmal, a marvel of Puc architecture, flourished with elegant mosaic facades and complex urban planning. But it was Chichen Itza that would become the centerpiece of this new Maya era. Unlike the classic cities, Chichen Itza was not ruled by a singular king, but appeared to operate as a kind of shared governance or council of elites, possibly even a theocratic republic of sorts, blending militarism, commerce, and religion in equal measure. This was a profound departure from the divine kingship model. suggesting that the Maya had internalized the lessons of the classic unraveling and were trying something radically different. The architecture of Chichen Itza reflects this shift. The Temple of the Warriors, the Great Ball Court, and the feathered serpent-decorated El Castillo Pyramid Showcase influences not only from traditional Maya iconography, but also from distant civilizations like the Toltecs of central Mexico. This suggests that Chichen Itza was not an insular city-state, but a cosmopolitan hub, a meeting place of merchants, priests, warriors, and diplomats from across Mesoamerica. Trade flourished. Salt from the northern coasts, obsidian from central Mexico, turquoise from the American Southwest, cacao from the lowlands, all flowed through networks that linked Maya cities with other Mesoamerican power centers. The sea, once a border, became a bridge. Maritime trade along the Yucatan coast and into the Gulf of Mexico became increasingly vital, giving rise to coastal cities like Tulum and Xcaret, with their own brand of semi-autonomous governance and defense. Religion evolved as well, while traditional deities like Chak, the rain god, and Itzamnaj, the sky creator, remained central. New cults and syncretic beliefs emerged. The feathered serpent, known in Maya as Kukulkan and in Nahua cultures as Quetzalcoatl, gained prominence, perhaps reflecting growing cultural exchange or the reimagining of older gods in times of shifting power. Rituals continued, including bloodletting and sacrifice, but their form and context often changed, adapting to new political realities and theological interpretations. By the 13th century, Chichen Itza itself began to decline, and a new power rose, Mayapan, a walled city that embraced confederation over conquest. Its government was said to be a kind of league, with representatives from various lineages or noble houses, though eventually plagued by internal strife and revolts. Mayapan's longevity, spanning nearly 250 years, stands as a testament to the adaptability and political ingenuity of the post-classic Maya. Across the Yucatan and the highlands, countless other cities, towns, and villages thrived, each with its own local customs, languages, and responses to the broader cultural landscape. The highland Maya, particularly in what is now Guatemala, continued to build elaborate cities like Cumarcaj, also known as Utatlan, capital of the Quiche Maya. This city, dramatically perched on a plateau and accessible only by narrow causeways, was a marvel of military strategy and ceremonial splendor. Here, new creation myths were written, notably the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Quiche, which told the story of the hero twins, of gods and underworlds, and of the first true humans fashioned from maize. The Popol Vuh was not just a cosmology, it was a mirror held up to a people reweaving their identity after centuries of transformation. Even in this period of reinvention, the Maya never abandoned their core. The maize fields were still tended, the sacred round of the 260-day Tzolk'in calendar still turned, and the starlit ceremonies continued under the watchful eyes of constellations whose names had been whispered for generations. They endured earthquakes, droughts, and the spectre of past collapse not as ruins in. Waiting but as living, adapting cultures. Indeed, by the time the Spanish arrived in the early 1500s, the Maya were anything but a vanished people. They were politically decentralized, yes, and fragmented into dozens of independent polities, but they were vibrant, active, and spiritually grounded. They had adapted their religion, their politics, their economics, and their diplomacy to meet a new world. A world on the verge of being upended not by internal collapse, but by an external catastrophe far more brutal, swift and lasting than anything the terminal classic had unleashed. The post-classic Maya remind us that resilience is not found in static grandeur or divine edicts, but in the quiet, persistent art of adaptation. These were not the twilight years of a fading people, but the dawn of something else entirely. The transformation of the Maya from a kingdom of temples to a patchwork of living cultures, a network of human voices still singing the old songs, even as new storms gathered on the horizon. When the Spanish arrived on the shores of the Yucatan Peninsula in the early 16th century, they were not met with silence or mystery or vanished civilizations. They were met with resistance, complexity, and the thundering heart of a living world. The Maya had not disappeared, they had evolved, and the land they inhabited was far from empty. It was a mosaic of city-states, alliances, rivalries, and sacred traditions, each one with its own language, gods and histories written in glyphs and blood. The first Spanish expeditions, like those led by Hernández de Córdoba in 1517 and Juan de Grijalva in 1518, encountered well-organized towns, bustling trade routes, and warriors who met them not with awe, but with arrows. The Maya had seen foreign sails before, long-distance traders, shipwrecked strangers, but never anything like the conquistadors, armed with steel, gunpowder, horses, and an unshakable belief in their own divine right. Hernán Cortés passed through Maya territory on his way to the Aztec heartland, using diplomacy, deception, and violence in equal measure. The Maya, fragmented though they were, watched and learned. Some chose alliance, others resistance, but all would soon find themselves caught in the gears of an empire that sought not coexistence, but domination. Unlike the rapid conquest of the Aztec Empire, the Spanish campaign against the Maya was anything but swift. It dragged on for nearly 2 centuries, longer than the entire existence of some European dynasties. This was not a single war, but a long series of localized conflicts, rebellions, negotiations, betrayals, and genocides. Spanish conquistadors like Pedro de Alvarado led brutal campaigns through the highlands, torching towns, massacring civilians, and toppling indigenous temples to erect Christian crosses. Yet even in the face of overwhelming firepower and foreign disease, the Maya resisted. In the Petén Basin, the Itza Maya of Tayasal held out until 1697, over 150 years after the fall of the Aztec capital. They repelled wave after wave of Spanish incursions, relying on jungle terrain, guerrilla tactics, and a fierce commitment to sovereignty. Their capital, built on an island in Lake Petén Itzá, was one of the last bastions of indigenous independence in the Americas. The Spanish conquest was not only military, it was cultural, religious, psychological. Catholic priests arrived with Bibles and fire, determined to erase Maya religion as heresy. Sacred texts were burned in public pyres, idols smashed, ceremonial centres desecrated. In 1562, the Spanish friar Diego de Landa infamously burned hundreds of Maya codices and ritual objects in a single auto da fe at Mani, declaring them works of the devil. In a cruel twist of fate, it is de Landa's own writings, intended as a blueprint for conversion, that now provide modern scholars with crucial insights into the Maya calendar, language, and worldview. He preserved fragments of the glyph system he tried to destroy, and from those fragments, the long process of decipherment would one day begin. But no book could capture the depth of the cultural trauma. The Spanish imposed not only a new religion but a new cosmology, one in which the gods of the maize and rain were replaced by saints and martyrs, where the cycles of the long count were discarded for the Gregorian calendar, where the rituals of bloodletting and spirit invocation were outlawed, stigmatized, and driven underground. The encomienda system, a brutal form of labor exploitation, reduced Maya communities to serfs under the rule of Spanish landowners. Whole populations were uprooted and resettled into reducciones, or mission towns, designed to facilitate both Christianization and economic control. Epidemics of smallpox, measles, and influenza, against which the Maya had no immunity, swept through the land, killing by the hundreds of thousands. Entire lineages vanished, oral traditions were severed, and ancestral knowledge fragmented. Yet through all of this, the swords, the sermons, the sickness, something remarkable happened. The Maya adapted. They practiced their rituals in secret, cloaking them in Christian symbolism. They wove their cosmology into Catholic feast days, whispered their histories across generations, and painted their gods in the margins of colonial manuscripts. They played the long game, not merely surviving, but resisting in ways subtle and profound. Some rose in open revolt, like the great Maya uprisings of the 17th and 18th centuries, which flared up across the Yucatan and highlands. Others resisted through cultural endurance, preserving language, agricultural techniques, astronomical knowledge, and the sacred rhythms of planting and prayer. The Spanish never truly conquered the Maya. They subdued them, exploited them, converted them. By force, but this never extinguished the flame of their civilization. Even today, millions of Maya people live across southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. They speak dozens of Maya languages, practice traditions passed down through centuries, and carry the memory of the conquest in their bones. Their temples may be tourist attractions, and their gods may be hidden behind saints' names, but their identity endures. The conquest was not a clean break, but a long, messy negotiation with power, a trauma that scarred deeply, but could not erase a legacy carved in stone, sung in cornfields, and remembered in dreams. In this way, the Maya story did not end with the Spanish. It entered another chapter, one of survival, hybridity, and quiet resistance. A whispered prayer to the old gods beneath the toll of church bells, a flickering candle beside an image of Christ draped in the colours of chac. They lived, not as relics, but as people. Wounded, yes, but walking forward. Always forward. In the centuries following the Spanish conquest, the grand cities of the Maya, once filled with chants, blood, incense and starlight, slipped into slumber beneath the canopy of the jungle. Trees wrapped their roots around carved stelae like fingers closing a book. Temples crumbled, masked in moss and the hush of time. To colonial eyes, these ruins were curiosities at best and pagan abominations at worst, relics of a supposedly vanished race. But to the Maya descendants who lived nearby, farming the same soil and naming the same stars, these places were never forgotten. They were sacred sites, wrapped in reverence, memory, and sometimes fear. It wasn't until the 19th century that the Western world truly began to awaken to the scope and mystery of Maya civilization. Adventurers, artists, and amateur scholars, hungry for the exotic and the unexplained, trekked into the Central American jungles to find the remnants of a world they barely understood. In 1839, John Lloyd Stephens and Frederick Catherwood arrived in Copan and later explored Palenque, Uxmal, and more. Stephens wrote with breathless wonder. Catherwood drew with delicate precision. Their books captured the public imagination, describing vast cities swallowed by vines, hieroglyphic stairways climbing into clouds, and temple tops peaking like forgotten dreams above the green. These accounts spurred an era of exploration, but also one of exploitation. Temples were looted, sculptures stolen, artifacts hauled off to private collections and museums with barely a footnote to their cultural significance. Colonial narratives painted the Maya as a dead people, their greatness consigned to the past. Yet the stones told a different story, if only someone could read them. For decades, scholars puzzled over the glyphs carved into stelae, altars and codices. At first, many assumed the writing was purely symbolic, astrological, ritualistic, not phonetic. But slowly, painstakingly, a revolution took place. In the mid-20th century, Russian linguist Yuri Knorosov proposed that the glyphs were syllabic, phonetic signs that could be decoded using surviving colonial-era texts. His work was initially dismissed, then begrudgingly reconsidered, and eventually vindicated. A new generation of epigraphers followed in his footsteps: Tatiana Proskoryakov, David Stewart, Linda Sheeley, each one decoding names, dates, lineages, wars and rituals from the stone and stucco. Suddenly the Maya were no longer faceless builders of temples. They were poets, kings, scribes, priests, astronomers, and warriors. Their cities had histories. Their glyphs were voices, rising from centuries of silence to say, "We were here. We knew the sky. We counted time. We named our children after gods." With the glyphs came stories of dynastic rivalries, of tragic defeats and glorious ascents, of blood offerings that nourished the world tree, of bull games that decided fates. It was a civilization not of mystery but of meaning, rich in symbolism and scientific rigor. Meanwhile, archaeology evolved into a more rigorous and respectful discipline. Excavations at Tikal, Copan, Caracol, and other sites unearthed vast plazas, royal tombs, and astronomical observatories. Advances in lidar scanning, using lasers from aircraft to pierce the jungle canopy, revealed the full extent of Maya urbanism. Entire cities, roadways, canals, and fortifications emerged from the green, showing that the Maya were not a scattered people, but a complex, interconnected civilization with tens of millions of inhabitants at their peak. But perhaps the most important rediscovery has not been archaeological. It has been cultural. In the past few decades, there has been a renaissance among modern Maya communities. In Guatemala, Mexico, Belize, and Honduras, millions of Maya people are reclaiming their language, identity, and heritage. Schools teach Maya languages like Quiche, Yucatec, and Quechua. Artists blend ancient motifs with modern mediums. Activists fight for land rights, environmental justice, and indigenous sovereignty, often drawing strength from their ancestral traditions. Ceremonies once banned are now performed openly. Corn is still planted with blessings. The Harb and Tzolk'in calendars still mark sacred days. The Maya are not just surviving, they are speaking, creating, resisting. They are living proof that civilization is not defined by stone monuments or vanished cities, but by the continuity of spirit, language, and tradition. In 2012, Popular culture latched onto the end of the long count calendar, spinning it into apocalyptic fantasy. But to the Maya, 2012 was not the end of the world. It was the turning of a great cycle, the renewal of time. Just as the Baktun rolled over, so too does their history continue, undeterred by conquest, misinterpretation, or erasure. They have endured droughts, colonizers, and centuries of misrepresentation, but they are still here, still speaking the old words, still honoring the maize god, still dreaming beneath the stars they once charted in stone. The legacy of the Maya is not frozen in time, it is a living thread, woven through generations, stretching from the roots of the jungle to the quiet resilience of a grandmother whispering creation myths to her grandchildren by firelight. The cities may have fallen, but the civilization, its knowledge, its memory, its people, never did. In glyphs and gardens, prayers and protests, the Maya still speak. And at last we are starting to listen. To ask why the great cities of the classic Maya crumbled is to invite a tangle of answers, each more complex than the last, each woven into the threads of time like the fibres of a 1,000-year-old tunic. It is one of archaeology's most tantalizing questions. How did a civilization so astronomically advanced, so socially sophisticated, and so spiritually intricate dissolve into jungle silence? There was no Pompeii, no fire from the sky, no singular enemy at the gates. Instead, the collapse of the Maya heartland was a slow, staggered decline, an unravelling more than an explosion, a vanishing act that left temples intact but hearts turned away. Theories abound, and they are not mutually exclusive. The first thread in this tapestry of endings is environmental. The land that gave life also withheld it. In the Peten Basin and surrounding lowlands, evidence from lake sediments and cave stalagmites points to a prolonged period of drought beginning around the 9th century. The Maya, who had transformed their environment with ingenuity, digging reservoirs, terracing hillsides, building massive canals, may have pushed the land to its limits. Deforestation to make way for agriculture and limestone kilns increased soil erosion and decreased rainfall absorption, setting up a fragile ecology where a single missed rainy season could mean disaster. Without enough water, crops failed. Without maize, the people starved. Without sustenance, faith in the divine rulers who promised fertility and favour began to waver. Another thread is political. The kings who once linked heaven and earth became entangled in earthly squabbles. Maya politics was not a stable empire but a fractious network of city-states, each with its own dynasties, ambitions, and gods. As resources dwindled, competition sharpened. Wars once fought for ritual prestige became battles of survival. Stele from the late classic period show an uptick in violent conquest. Captives displayed in submissive postures, hieroglyphs boasting of raids and beheadings. The great cities turned on each other. Tikal fought Calakmul. Karakol battled Naranjo. Alliances shifted like sand, and the cost of war drained the coffers of blood and trust alike. Rulers who once mediated between the gods and the crops now struggled to hold their own courts together. Palaces went empty, ceremonial centres were abandoned. The dynastic lineages, once so meticulously recorded, simply end. But political collapse alone doesn't explain the depth of the disintegration. Which brings us to social upheaval. When rulers could no longer provide food or protection, when temples no longer yielded rain, when war raged and famine crept into every corn basket, the people may have simply walked away. Some scholars suggest that the classic Maya cities were abandoned not in a blaze of destruction, but in a collective shrug. Villagers, farmers, artisans deciding it was no longer worth it to build pyramids for kings who could not keep the rains coming. In some regions, smaller rural settlements continued even as the ceremonial centres fell into disuse. It wasn't apocalypse, it was apathy. A gradual dispersal, a rejection of a system that no longer served. There's another factor too, cultural burnout. The classic Maya world revolved around blood, ritual and cosmic balance. The gods were not forgiving, they were hungry. And the rituals to appease them were elaborate and unceasing. Every victory, every drought, every celestial alignment required performance, sacrifice, construction. It was a civilization that demanded grandeur at every turn, and that grandeur came at a cost. When that system strained under the weight of environmental and political stress, the sheer effort to maintain the illusion of divine order may have become unsustainable. The last kings carved increasingly desperate messages into stone, invoking ancestors, commemorating ever smaller achievements, as if they were shouting into the void, hoping someone, anyone, was still listening. And then, silence. Cities like Copan, Palenque, Tikal and Yaxchilan ceased major monument production. Their temples stood, but their courts were empty. Jungle vines crept up steps once trod by priests and queens. Owls nested in the glyph-covered lintels. The long-count calendars stopped counting. But the story does not end here. Not really. Because the collapse of the classic centres was not the end of the Maya people. Cities in the north, like Uxmal and Chichen Itza, rose to prominence in the post-classic period. The Maya adapted, migrated, transformed. And long after their pyramids were swallowed by vines, their descendants remained, tending maize, whispering stories, drawing constellations in the night sky. So why did the Maya civilization collapse? The answer lies not in one cause, but in a chorus of them. Drought, yes, but also war, political fragility, resource exhaustion, and the slow erosion of faith in a system that demanded so much and gave so little in return. It was not a fall from grace, it was a turning away. A recognition, perhaps, that the great kings were no longer divine, that the world would not end if the stelae stopped rising, that the gods would still listen if the prayers were whispered in the forest instead of shouted from the top of a temple. The mystery remains, but maybe that's fitting. The Maya saw time as cyclical, not linear. They believed in eras that rise and fall, that end only to begin again. And so it was with their civilization. One age ended, yes, but another was already beginning, quiet as footsteps in the jungle. If you listen closely, you can still hear them. And so, we find ourselves at the end of another winding moonlit trail, one lined not with certainty, but with questions that echo like chants through a long-abandoned temple corridor. We've wandered through the steamy jungles of Mesoamerica, tracing the glyphs etched into stone, the rise and fall of dynasties, the cosmic heartbeat of a civilization that once danced with the stars. We've peered into cenotes and stepped through ruined doorways, not in search of gold, but of understanding. We've sat beside scribes as they painted bark paper codices by torchlight, marched with kings through sacred ball courts, knelt with priests before the gods of maize and rain. And through it all we've listened, not just to the roar of theories or the clamour of collapse, but to the soft, enduring whisper of survival. The Maya story is not a vanished one. It is a living song, shifting and adapting across centuries. Its melody lingers in modern marketplaces, in the lullabies of elders, in the shadows of those same temples that once seemed forgotten. We are so often taught that great civilizations either endure forever or vanish completely. That brilliance is synonymous with permanence, that decline is death. But the Maya teach us something subtler, something more human, that even the grandest of towers may crumble, but the soul of a people endures in ways that stone never could. Their calendars still turn, their languages are still spoken, their memories are encoded not just in glyphs, but in hands planting corn, in prayers whispered to a night sky that's still charted with the same reverence, the same awe. The collapse of a civilization does not mean the end of a culture. Sometimes what falls away is not what was most vital, but what was most burdened. The people live on. The story continues. And perhaps, somewhere out there, under the same stars that once guided Maya astronomers, another child learns to speak the words of their ancestors, to walk the sacred paths, to remember. If this quiet unravelling teaches us anything, it's that resilience can be quiet, that not all endings are catastrophes, some are doorways. And with that, dear listener, if you're still with me, eyes heavy, mind wandering through the echo of stele and the rustle of jungle leaves, I thank you for your curiosity, your time, and your company beneath the cosmic canopy. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed our little journey tonight. It helps more than you know. And I'd love to know what brought you here, because no matter how far we drift apart in space and time, it's nice to know someone else is out there, asking questions in the dark. Good night. This has been The Midnight Inquiry.